Today I'm going to demonstrate for you the second sketchbook, which is an animal drawing. You should get a handout like this where it goes through the different steps of what kind of animal image to choose, how to get it started, and then what it should look like when it is all done. So just a reminder, this sketchbook should not be shaded. What I want to see is you using the different drawing strategies, breaking up the animal into basic shapes, and then adding in the contours and mapping in highlights and shadows to help tell where you would be shading light and dark. So to start, you want to begin, well, first choose an image, a challenging image. Don't choose something super simple just because you think it's going to be easy. Also make sure you can see the entire animal, no baby animals. If the feet or something is covered up slightly by grass, make sure that you don't draw something you can't see. So add in that line indicating where the grass is located. So begin first by enlarging your animal freehand using a 2H pencil, marking the outside dimensions very lightly with pencil in order to fill the page. So this is where you want to use comparative measurements and basic shapes. I gave everyone a transparency, so make sure you hold on to this throughout the term because you're going to be using this for different sketchbook assignments and assignments in class. But using the transparency, you want to break down the image into the basic shapes. It's going to help you simplify things. So when I look at the dog that's on the back of the handout, I'm going to start with drawing an oval for the head. I'm going to add in a little line indicating where those eyes are and where it turns to the snout. I'm going to draw in a triangular shape for the ears, or the only ear you can see. Some diagonals for the neck, this shoulder muscle. It's creating a circular or oval kind of shape. I'm going to draw just some lines coming down for the legs, just angling them where the feet are located. For this back end of the body, I'm going to just create an oval. And then again, just break down the legs into some simpler shapes. And then I'm going to add in the tail. So this is just a way to get things started for your sketch. So now when I start in my sketchbook, I can look at the simplified version using the basic shapes to help me get things placed in correctly rather than overwhelming myself with looking at this detailed image. So I'm going to grab my 2H pencil to start. There it is. And then I'm going to use those basic shapes and comparative measurements to get it placed in. You want to make your image larger than your reference photo. You also want to fill your sketchbook page. So in order to do this, I'm going to start with drawing the head because that's what I started with on my transparency. So I'm just going to sketch in an oval. And then before I do anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the measurements to figure out how many heads. So I'm going to measure the head and then I'm going to check how many heads wide is my dog. That way I know where my sketch should be finished onto my page. Make sure I'm drawing it the right way. So here's one head. I'm just using my pencil to measure it. And then I'm going to turn it. There's one head. Two heads is hitting about where the back end is. So it's just a little under 3 heads wide. So if I measure the oval I drew for the head, there's one. I'm going to turn it 2, 3. So I'm going to make a little mark here that's going to indicate about where that tail should end. I'm going to do the same thing to figure out the height. So I'm just going to measure up and down. So there's one head, 2, 3. It's a little over 3 heads tall. So I can do the same thing here. There's 1, 2, 3, and it's just a little bit over. So I'm just going to give myself an indication of about where those feet should hit when I'm done. Now these are just estimates to help you get things placed in. Now that I have my head drawn, I can start looking and comparing all of these other parts of my dog. Another trick is siding angles, so I can check the angle of this back line, and I'm going to do the same thing, just moving my pencil. So here's the angle for the back. I'm just going to move it up, mark it with my finger. And this line starts just a little bit above the head. And then I'm going to double check it. I think it should be just a slightly less angled line. So I'm going to make those corrections. I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom part of the neck. I'm also going to look at things like alignments. So where is this hitting in relation to the ear? I think my ear needs to come down a little bit more. If I line up where this back part, this back line hits, just make a horizontal line with my pencil. I can see about where that's intersecting with the head, so I want to make sure. It's doing the same thing on my drawing. So just make sure you're doing these kinds of comparisons. It's only going to help you in the long run. So I need to add in the circle. That's indicating that shoulder, upper arm muscle. I also want to look at shapes made out of negative spaces. So I want to compare about how much do I see here between this circle, this line, and this line, and I'm going to compare it to what I see on the original drawing. So always be making these comparisons. Move this off to the side for a minute. I need to make a comparison here because when I'm looking at the basic shapes I drew on the overhead transparency, this back part of the leg is sticking out past the behind. So when I line this up here, it is not lining up. I think I actually need to make this back oval a little bit smaller, especially since my tail was coming out a little bit. Now that I have my basic shapes placed in, I can go ahead and start adding in the contours. Now this is where you could either clean off your transparency and redraw the animal on it, using the exact contours, or just set your transparency aside and look at the photo. So when I'm looking at the photo, I need to start adding in the exact contours of the snout. The ear is not, it's triangular shape, but it's rounded. His head comes up just a little bit more. This is where you should also switch out and grab your HB pencil. And just draw these lines directly onto the basic shapes. You don't need to erase the basic shapes. I want to be able to see them. I want to see that you've been using the strategies that you are learning in class. Once you have the basic contours in, go ahead and start adding in more of the details and also mapping in the highlights and shadows. This is what's going to help you when it comes to shading your animal later when we do our animal drawing. So now I'm going to look in, where do I see that stripe on the head? It's hard to see the eye on the transparency or on the copy here, but it's like a triangular kind of shape. I'm just going to lightly sketch in where I see some of the darker and lighter contours. Help define where the muscles are. Only erasing you should do is when you're making any corrections. But still leave that evidence of the basic shapes used underneath the contours and then adding the mapping of the highlights and shadows. So once you're done, your sketchbook should look like this. Make sure you include your reference image, and that's it. On to sketchbook 3.